Yeah, and yeah, to add to that, like more primitive ancestors, like the IVR system, like the interactive voice response system. So those kind of so chatbot is also kind of a step ahead from there. So the mechanics still remain the same probably, but I mean, like there in an IVR system, like you only select from a given choices, but here it is almost like you are interacting with a real human. I mean, like that's how a chatbot should look like. There are simple chatbots, obviously, like which require, the technology may not be like that advanced. It can be simple, but if there are, like chatbots which use a lot, where you want to kind of like look at a lot of different complex set of questions. So in that case, also the technology. Gets a bit more complicated to handle those kind of bots. So it totally depends on the kind of bot you're trying to build, the kind of data that you have, and also the volume of data that you will actually get. So all these are different factors which can actually kind of like add to the technology front.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep going on that data aspect that you mentioned, especially since you're working with Accenture. I'm just curious, do you have any real data that's showing ROI in using digital assistants or chatbots, either pre-pandemic, now, because we've used so many new technologies in this.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll not go into the details of the clients, but yeah, definitely we are seeing a really increase in the number of chatbot responses because I mean, like there are two aspects to it. So you have, say, for example, a service desk or a customer service desk. So now you are not able to probably go to a store and like put forward your complaints or grievances. So people are reaching out on the websites or I mean, like going to the links and trying to like find out a lot of answers. So the volume of interactions have increased a lot because of this pandemic, and also the kind of interactions that you are having is becoming more complex because sometimes you can see that there are like chatbots like Veena, which Google have built, right? So which has been built on about like 500 GB of data. So this means that much of training they have done on the data to actually get to a chatbot, which is like really advanced, and it can also techniques like Siri or like assistant like you have in Samsung Bixby. So these are also kind of like voice assistants which interacts with a person as if it's a real human, and it can you can ask questions to Siri like Siri, hey. What do you think about the day? Siri might give you an answer. So similar to that, like Meena can also try to understand like your sentiment or what you're feeling. So definitely, I mean, like it has gone up, I would say, and the increased, dependency on chatbots and also interactions that people have is making companies like more conscious that probably they need to invest a lot more in this aspect, I would say. So ROI is definitely on the positive to answer your question without giving numbers, specific numbers.
Thank you. Does anybody want to add anything, perhaps in their experience, their perspective? Have you seen, and even ROI, return on investment? It could just be that you're seeing customer satisfaction just skyrocketing.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually working with one big client to really measure out all the things, and it's kind of complicated to just sort of really zoom in on this result is now because of
Yeah.
X, right? But you can see an NPS and satisfaction go up, and you can see certain things you can do to increase completion rate, and therefore cost in the call centers will go down. But if you look at the bigger picture of the ROI, I would say about companies are trying to automate about 85% of their conversations with people on every type of journey and every touch point. And as they start doing that, and they'll have the benefits, they'll start adding more conversations to be personalized and more contextual. If your competitor starts doing that, then you will have to start doing that as well, right? So if you look at there's two things here, like the world is changing and you just need to start doing that because it's going to be good for your business for survival in a way. First, it's like, hey, we saved $10 per conversation on this topic, right? So there's like two aspects of that. But I think a lot of stuff around the ROI, that we're going to be able to measure that now, because in the past few years, everything was just built and designed so poorly that the results weren't there. Like people would start optimizing from such a low baseline. They would create like a very bad chatbot and then start iterating based on that and try to get some results. And I think a lot of companies are now throwing that out and more maturely starting from scratch to really see the business impact more directly. So yeah, numbers are still tough. Like I haven't heard many say like, all right, we saved X because of what.
Yeah. Shyamala, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. So for us, it's about, like in the vehicle, it's a completely different situation and dynamics, right? People are distracted and they are driving, and the whole point why they are using the voice assistant is because, it gives them the convenience. Chatbot and other things are good to have because, it's kind of optimization, but then in vehicle, it becomes a need sometimes. And what we look at when we are looking at ROI is, the use cases, the adoption, how many people are using the use cases. Like Hans mentioned, like a couple of years back, the technology was not as evolved, right? So what we saw then was calling someone or music was the only use case which people were looking at or using the most. Now we are seeing more and more use cases. People want to do text messages, emails, or people want to do home automation and voice shopping and things like that. So we've started seeing people, like wanting those things through our data, because every utterance, is recorded when the user said something. So we have logs and we know what users have been asking for, what domain has been used the most. So analytics plays a big part here. And what we have realized is people have been wanting to know a lot more things now, like also wanting to know the vehicle status, or, what's going on with my vehicle, or, how much gas do I have and things like that. So definitely, like when people are wanting those things, there is a desire to do more and more. And that is how we actually measure the utility and the need and the ROI.
Fascinating. Thank you. I think it's also changed how we look at ROI. It's not just monetary, but it's really, what's our just human benefit when we get things done more quickly, and we have our answers. We have answers more quickly, and we can just move on instead of being on the phone for a long time.
And just to add there, typically, that is one do for a chatbot as well. A chatbot shouldn't take a long time to actually get back to a customer, because that is where you are going to lose your customer. So if you actually go to a website and seek some assistance, and the chatbot says that I'll get back to you in a day, or like you'll get your answer in 24 hours, that's where you lose the customer. So it should be more instant and more interactive, and probably you have to keep your customer engaged as well. So that is where a good chatbot would differ from like a very simple or a basic chatbot. So that also will actually have a play in your ROI as well, that how your customer interaction is going to improve. So I just want to add that point as well.
Great point. Thank you. Hans, you mentioned design. So I'm going to segue into what does a design team look like when you are building these digital assets and chatbots? What are the roles, the workflow?
Yeah, that's a great question there. So what we see is, like most companies, like we have teams with like 100 designers working there. And what we see with most companies is like it starts with one little bot, and then before you know, they have a bunch of deployments, and then they start developing one big department. That's what we sort of focus on, is like who's going to be working in that department, what's the skill set that they need, and what are the job titles, and how are they going to work together. And we sort of see three roles now. So we have the AI trainer that really turns data into understanding. So it's very focused on understanding what people say and building in the platform and optimizing that. Then we have conversation designers that think about sort of the structure of the conversation, of turning, business processes and information into a natural flow. So that's more like the UX side of it in a way. And then you have conversational copywriters that are very focused on just turning words into dialogue, and they focus on personality. They focus on psychology. These people would also work with like your sonic branding team in a way to make, figure out what it would sound like and really focus on the eventual experience. And those three are kind of the right balance in the team, because the way we look at it, if you have a conversation between an artificial brain and a human brain, then technology and psychology need to be equally important. And you see with teams that fail, they have so many engineers and hardly any designers. If you're an engineer, everything's an engineering problem, and nobody then wants to talk to your assistant anymore. But if you have that right balance between psychology, language, and technology in that team, then you create better AI assistants. And sort of setting up teams like this, and we sort of have like for 3 AI trainers, you see like 2 conversation designers and 1 copywriter. That's usually like sort of the balance in the team, and they work together in a very human-centric way, actually. So what we do is if you have a conversation between a human and a bot, then they both want to get something from that conversation. So the human has certain motivations and anxieties and needs when they reach out. But from the bot's perspective, it's like, I need to ask you certain questions. I need to know certain things in order to help you. So we map that out on a canvas, and then people actually sit back to back from each other. So it's just, no only verbal communication, and they sort of role play the conversation and they iterate on that. So it becomes like improvisational theater, and it allows you to figure out what the most natural flow of the conversation actually is. And that is, I think, like the key, particularly in voice design, that a lot of companies don't get right. Right? They just start, writing or just creating flowcharts, but people don't talk that way, right? So the best thing to do is to actually get into character and pretend that you are a human. I guess that's pretty easy to do, but also pretend to be a bot, and then just have that conversation. And every time someone asks a question, we're like, all right, is this something that more people would want to know? Yeah, probably. Well, then we should include that in the design. And it's like an iterative process through role playing that really creates human-centric experiences. And it's really the combination of sort of the conversation designers doing the role playing, the copywriter turning that into something nice that people want to interact with, and then the AI trainer implementing that in the platform. And they sort of have a workflow with the 3 of them to create, I guess, natural and successful AI assistants.
Thank you. Does do you, Mythili or Shyamala, have anything to add from your perspective on design and the teams?
Yeah. A couple of things for sure. It also depends on, what Hans mentioned is, ideal. Not every company actually works that way in, big techs, although, we desire and want to, for sure, right? But what I have seen is, especially, having worked with Amazon, having worked with Ford, what I would say is UX designer plays a very important role, researcher plays a very important role, because those are the kind of people, who's going to. So, for example, we have researchers, and we do a lot of research right from the beginning to identify the use cases. So when I was doing the autonomous vehicles use cases, we did, simulation testings, a lot of simulations, where we created an autonomous vehicle, all, with boxes and cartons and all of those things, and had users in the vehicle and identified the use cases. And then from there to designing the solutions and testing it out, you may be doing some of those things, as a designer, conversational designers would be doing some of those testings, but we need that research eye to help us out with some of those as we start thinking about use cases where we have to test those voice interactions in the vehicle. Sometimes the vehicles are actual vehicles, sometimes those are just simulation vehicles. So we do a lot of initial testings as well, right, with the team, but the research team helps us do some of those. And it's a fine balance. Yes, UX writer is needed because, they are the one who's going to actually define and, make things meaningful, because as a UX designer or a conversational designer, people are creating the interactions, thinking end-to-end flow, but then they are not thinking about the other things. Coming to the other aspects of voice design, simple things like when you interact with Alexa, those lights or rings, which are, which you are seeing, are the visual cues, which is telling like, I'm listening, I'm speaking. The moment you think about those in different modalities, like a car or a touch screen or things like that, you have so many other things to consider. You cannot just have a conversational designer design those things. You need to think about a visual designer or someone who understands, the visual aspects to work on those and map out like which of these need to work with which. So for example, which one do you think is processing or should be processing? Because users need to map that out in their flows. For me, conversation design is not just, like a dialogue between a human and a machine. There are so many other elements which comes with it. How do you do error handling? Or how do you define those visual cues or audio cues? So sounding branding, like Hans was mentioning, is also important because, when do we play ear cons? Do we need ear cons for every situation? And things like that is important. Testing those out throughout is also very important as well. So there has to be a fine balance of researchers, designers, writers, and everyone working in collaboration to make this thing work for sure.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly correct what both of them, both Shyamala and Hans mentioned. And I will also mention one thing which I saw with one recent client. So where I mean, like, the need was to design a bot which kind of like converses in a style and manner that matches the buyer personas. So it is like where you have cold emails with no personalization, but probably it's only fair that your chatbot also has a personality. So it's like you, instead of like having a very very serious conversation, so it's kind of like time to use your creativity and kind of like have those bots where, as if like it's like a real person it's interacting, and also how your buyer would actually trying to understand like what the buyer needs and what the buyer wants, and kind of like bringing that personality into the bot, which really makes the bot connect to your buyer, right? So that's, I think, like one important aspect as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. Well, you all have just touched on another subject. You're really helping me segue into my questions. How important then is infusing a brand's personality in the design and building a digital assistant and having a chatbot? Because Alexa and Google kind of have a monopoly right now on the experience. You when you talk to Alexa, it's Alexa, and you don't, even if you're trying to interact with, I don't know, the H&M site or whatever shoes you're trying to buy, you're still interacting not with their brand. So how important is it to really design a voice or these ear cons and incorporate them? And perhaps Shyamala, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question. I love this topic, personalities. So see, regardless of whether you give your bot a personality or not, people will give it. It's like how people brand other people as well, right? So now it depends. How do you want people to brand your assistant? Whether you want them to brand whatever they want, or do you want it to resonate to your brand? For example, Ford. We have our own traits, we have our own branding guidelines, right? So do you want the bot to resonate to some of those things, or just one off, like what happened with Take? Right. So it's really important to think about those aspects as well. So that being said, yes, there has to be a personality. Now that is where you need to think about it. I like saying this a lot, that a voice assistant is like your employee. Okay. When I'm talking, I'm representing a company, a brand. So the same thing happens when people are interacting with a bot or an assistant. They are actually, interacting with the brand directly or indirectly, consciously or subconsciously. So it becomes really important to think about those things. And that is why we need to think about how much should we infuse the personality into a bot? What is that balance, fine balance? We don't want to get into any of the extremes for sure, right? But knowing those things are important. Depending on your brand strategy, depending on your product, your values, all of those things, you have to really make sure there's a fine balance between your bot. It shouldn't be like, okay, the bot is completely off your brand, because again, it is reflecting your brand's personality as well. So for me, I would say yes, it is good to have, because regardless, people will brand it, right? I would not say it is mandatory, because some people would say it is important, it is not important, but I feel like it is good to have. It is something everyone should be thinking about.
Yeah, it's like we always start with persona. I guess there's persona and then there's personality content, right? So we always look at what are the use cases, with pretty much which conversations are we going to be having, and then who are we going to be having them with? These are your user personas, and then who's the best to have these conversations on our behalf, which becomes your persona. And we create backstories, and we go pretty far. It's like, where do they live? What do they look like? What are their names? How old are they? What do their family lives look like? Because you want to create like an in-depth character, because if you have multiple people writing on the writing team as well, it's like, it's much easier if they understand where the words are coming from to create consistency, because that consistency just creates trust. And particularly if we want to have longer conversations that are more personal and more transactional, we're going to be asking more from people. So trust becomes very important, and persona is really about creating trust. And then there's also personality content. It's like chit chat about the weather or tell me a joke, etc. You use that to build relationships with people. And what you'll see is if you have personality content, then people actually become more forgiving for when the bot fails. All right. So if I'm having fun talking to you anyways, and then you don't know the answer, it's okay. But if it's just a Q&A thing and you don't know an answer, it becomes kind of silly, right? So how to use persona, personality content, study branding, your own voice to create that consistency and take control of it and actually allow for trustworthy and longer interactions with people.
Mythili?
Yeah, I think also, there are a few questions that we need to ask before we kind of like breathe life into the chatbot. Like, what kind of things that you want the chatbot to answer? Like, is it a topical question, or is it like a promotional chatbot? Is it going to be lighthearted or corporate? Is it or simply transactional or humorous? Is it going to have like a large narrative or bullet points, general audience or business audience? Like, should it also answer random questions or purely on-topic questions? So these are also some of the things which can kind of breathe life into your chatbots. And as we say, it's not about like what you say, but how you say it. So the same things, I think you can kind of like bring into like, hey, how are you doing, or like what's up. So these kind of things can also really help with the interactions that you're having. That the customer is having. So sometimes like that also helps, like keep the engagement going, or keep it kind of like keeping it lighthearted. Depending on, obviously, as I said, you want to keep it strictly transactional, or if you want to kind of like go into a little bit more, like detailed oriented, or you want to keep it lighthearted. So depends on like what you're looking at and how you want to kind of like brand it. So, and also like going with your overall brand, like this is how I look. Say if you want to see like a McDonald's, like it's more a leisure kind of a brand, right? So obviously you don't want to keep it like simply transactional, but as opposed to maybe like a business kind of thing. So maybe like Ford, so in that case, probably like you'll be like more transactional. So I think like that's what comes to my mind right now.
Thank you. I see that our organizer has jumped into the convo.
That's right. But go on. We can. In fact, if there are any questions, then we can perhaps address those questions. If not, then maybe I could pitch in with a couple of questions.
Sure, because I don't see any in the discussion or in the Q&A. So otherwise, I also have plenty.
I think we have time for just one question, and I'd like to address it to any one of the panelists. In fact, one of the topics that really caught my attention during this discussion was the ROI aspect. When it comes to ROI and valuations, the valuation for technology firms is completely different. It's got nothing to do with fundamentals. It's got everything to do with future earnings. You look at big tech companies. Many of these big tech companies have not reported any profits or very little profits, but yet the valuation is going through the roof. In fact, Shyamala, you mentioned you were working on autonomous vehicles. The world's #1 autonomous vehicle manufacturer, Tesla, the valuation is just somewhere else, even though the profits may or may not be there. So my question is, when it comes to ROI, is that really something that we need to focus on? Because for technology companies, the valuation and the calculation on how it works is completely different. It's almost as if the investors are not even looking at any return.
That's a very good question. So, yes, ROI is important at one point, but we also need to make sure that, like at what stage. For example, I like giving this example because Amazon was a loss-making company for many, many, many years. Okay, they invested in everything possible profitable, because they found value in something, and they were like, yes, we should be, creating this online sales platform. We should be creating Alexa. We should be creating blah. We should be doing the cloud business and all, right? At that point, the point was like, yes, this has a lot of potential. If not now, maybe in future, this will bring us a lot of value. And that's exactly what happened with Amazon. When Alexa was launched, all of a sudden the dynamics changed from a loss-making company to a multi-billion-dollar company. It has changed everything. Like, it's a profit-making company now, but it has been loss-making for 10, 15 years, right? If they would have thought about ROI immediately at that point, saying like, well, you know what, it's not working, let's punt it, or not even think about it, that would have been wrong. So the strategy has to be something where you are thinking about, the long-term goal and not the immediate goal, which may happen. Sometimes long-term could be longer, but yes, voice has a lot of potential, for example, right? Voice commerce is picking up, and especially with the pandemic, now voice is being used everywhere, including healthcare and home security everywhere. We are seeing more and more like drive-thrus also adopting voice experiences and things, which says like, yes, this industry will grow, but eventually it will take time. It's not going to happen overnight. So if you're thinking about ROI and thinking about, immediate returns, it will not happen. It's like, the investment which we do.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, even when it comes to immediate returns, perhaps they may not. The point is, there may never be a return, but still the valuation of the company will be going through the roof, like we see with the big tech firms. Could we see that happening?
For sure, I definitely feel that would happen, and that has what happened with most of the companies, right? So not every company who has adopted a voice experience is a profit-making company, but because it is enhancing the user experience for the users, all of a sudden, like there is more and more, value for the company or brand, right? For example, if you look at Tesla, it has not been a profit-making company either, but, people love, and they love the HMI, they love the experience, and they want more and more of that. And that is why, the valuation is going high, because companies or the industry is seeing a value, like if not now, maybe in future, there will be, bet for that company. So.
In fact, last time I checked, Tesla shares were at an all-time high just 2 days back again. Yeah. So anyway, do any of the panelists have anything to add to the ROI valuation discussion?
Well, it's finding the right balance between what you want to do today and long term, right? So usually for most companies, do you expect to use AI to talk to people, right? And for most companies, that's a yes, we will be using AI to talk to people. Well, then it's probably time to learn how to do that, right? And if you can find the use cases right now that are going to give like an immediate return, then that's great. But you still have to invest in this and learn how to do this properly, because it is inevitable. So that's sort of the long-term thing. And also, like you saw, when we had the previous platform shift, when we went from desktop to mobile, you had these app-first companies, like you had Uber. And are we now with voice going to see a new, like the Uber of voice, like these companies that are voice-first, that are just launching out of nowhere, that could potentially have massive valuations based on no underlying cash flow yet. So definitely see that, but they're not here yet. So for existing companies to just start adding voice and conversational AI to get a higher valuation, I think that's tricky. If you look at insurance companies that are new, like Lemonade, that are very conversational, then you do see it, right? So if you're starting out now and adopting conversational interfaces entirely, you can get a massive valuation and then sort of bank on that promise of the future. For current companies, if you're just an enterprise right now, you just need to learn how to talk to people via AI, because otherwise you're going to go down in 10 years.
Right. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for spending your time with us and sharing with us your knowledge and insights for the Voice Tech Summit Middle East. We are running a little short of time, but if any of our viewers would like to interact with the speakers, they are, of course, available backstage and in the VIP booth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Really lovely.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Okay, everybody, so we will directly move into our next session, which is how to clarify a brand and why you need to know your customer to create a great user experience for a chat box or voice assistant. Our next speaker is Kerry Roberts, who's the owner of Branding Connection.